Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News Monday, February 2nd. It is Groundhog Day, which is how you feel if you're watching the news, but also the fact that Punxsutawney Phil has seen his shadow, which means 6 more weeks of Democratic terrorism in the state of New Jersey, Minneapolis, New York, Los Angeles, California, which is not a state, I know, but you get where I'm coming from. As this is going on, the federal government is being shut down by the Democratic Congress, and the bone of contention is the Democratic Congress's need to somehow abolish ICE or defund and destroy whatever the ICE units, and everything else will be fine. And basically, what we're dealing with here is what we would call sabotage by reform, and it shows how Congress is trying to kill immigration law without repealing it. So, what happens when Congress dislikes a law but doesn't have the votes to repeal it? In today's episode, we're going to talk about that, how these so called ICE reforms embedded in the DHS funding aren't reform at all, but a constitutional end run around separation of powers and equal protection. In plain English, we explain why this strategy is dangerous, discriminatory, and likely unconstitutional. Now, the editor would like me to tell you that I am not a lawyer, nor did I play one in TV or even in jail. But I will say that we have looked through legal documentation and various other sources to give you this presentation. If I were to say, do this, and this at trial, we would say the same thing. But let's just follow through and you will understand quite clearly what we are talking about and have talked about in a number of articles in the past. And we're going to talk about what mainstream media keeps calling ICE reform. Once you take away those words and every other term that they're using for it and stop crying about that nurse who got himself shot, what we're actually talking about here is more like constitutional sabotage. Now, this isn't about whether you like immigration law. This isn't about whether Congress is allowed to quietly kill laws it doesn't like without repealing them by punishing the people tasked with enforcing them. Congress, if it finds a law that it does not like or the people do not like, is supposed to repeal it. Just keep that in mind as we go along. So, what's being proposed here? The Democrats are demanding new conditions on funding for the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, not by changing immigration law, but by attaching strings to the budget. These include new warrant restrictions that don't exist in statute, limits on how agents can operate in the field, which can't do that, mandatory coordination with hostile local governments. No reason to do that, and you'll see past history will tell you why. Rules that increase personal exposure and risk to agents. This is the same kind of thing that we have discussed in the past about regular law enforcement and federal law enforcement. When elected officials make a community too hot to handle for law enforcement, it increases exposure to risk on the actual police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and things like that. Therefore, the elected officials should be responsible for the issue. As I said, the nurse who was shot and the other girl who were shot, most of the liability of those cases, believe it or not, should get thrown back onto the governor, the mayor, the NGOs, anyone who put her and him in the path of that bullet. They are more responsible than the agent by law. I would tell you that. People will say no, but then again, there's still a little bit of freedom of speech in the country and we're using it correctly. So here's the problem. None of those things that we just talked about repeals this law or repeals the law that governs how ICE operates. The law stays on the books because it's there. Enforcement is just made harder, slower, riskier, and more expensive until it stops working. This is often seen in cities or states that hate firearms. They make these gigantic draconian laws on how to get a gun because they can still say to the US Constitution, you can get a gun, but you have to go through these hoops. Never has really been tracked down and beaten as it should have, but that's just the story. So keep that in the back of your mind. Try to get a gun in New Jersey, handgun. Try to get a handgun in New York. Try to get a gun, and I think any more at all in Virginia. I think Virginia is going to go crazy too. Right? If you drive through New Jersey, if you drive through Virginia and they find a gun in the car, God help you if it's not taken apart in pieces in a locked box because there is no carries there. All right. So that's the plan. Make the job so hard and so risky and so expensive that people won't do it. Therefore, they will throw up their hands and stop enforcing the law. The Constitution is actually very simple on this point. Congress writes the laws, right? The executive branch enforces it. If Congress thinks a law is wrong, there is a process. You repeal it, you amend it, you debate it in public, you take responsibility. That's the process, right? What Congress is not allowed to do is say, we'll keep the law, but we'll make enforcement so burdensome that no one can realistically carry it out. That's not oversight. That would be considered, as they say in the East, an end run around the Constitution. So courts have been clear on this for decades. Congress cannot use appropriations to do indirectly what it cannot do directly. The reason Congress cannot do this directly is they do not have the votes. So you are also seeing a fringe minority pushing the rest of them to enact unpopular, it's not law, but an unpopular situation which affects the majority. It is tail wagging the dog. It is wrong. Constitution says it is wrong. So why this is discriminatory? And people always say, oh, I always say, let's talk about the part almost no one wants to talk about. And it's a shame because there are a few good lawyers still out there that are involved in the federal government. There are some good lawyers in this area who I would love to see us get the money together to challenge this, but we just don't have the money. The Republican Party in South Florida is as stupid gets. And if there is any money, it's being used for elaborate golf outings and shit like that. Things that don't actually win elections. Will be that Texas election here very soon. Trust me. And it will have been lost by the officers of the regional executive committees, not by the rank and file. Anyway, back to the story. So these restrictions that we're discussing that the people of the Democratic Party in Congress want to put on there, they don't apply to all federal law enforcement. FBI isn't mentioned. DEA isn't mentioned. U.S. Marshals, the SS. None of these groups, or does it say all federal law enforcement? It only mentions ICE because these guys are communist terrorists with very limited idea of what the power is that they wield. You'll see it in a lot of charitable organizations too. I'm the boss now, so we're going to do shit my way. Well, it doesn't work that way. Okay. So only the agency enforcing a politically unpopular law, and it's only politically unpopular with certain people. They're the only ones that are getting hammered in this issue. And that matters because when the government singles out one group of citizens for special burdens based not on a neutral criteria, but political hostility, courts do not call that reform. They call it, say it with me together, discrimination. Take the word ICE agent out and put black people during Jim Crow. Take the ICE agent out and put Japanese internees in World War II. It's all the same thing going on here. The characters change, the story is the same. The real inversion that's happening is civil rights law exists to protect citizens from abuse of government power. However, since I would say President Obama, Civil rights language is being used to punish U.S. citizens, especially ICE agents, for doing their lawful job. The citizens who are agents, because how could you not be? The agents are American citizens, are enforcing laws passed by Congress, are now being subject to higher personal risk, exposure, and professional penalty than they should. And that is not civil rights. That's what we call retaliatory governance. You can see I didn't go to Harvard. You don't advance civil rights by stripping rights from citizens who enforce the law. And any police that are watching this, this includes you guys walking a beat if you still do such things, and the boys in the 3-9 that are holding it down for everybody else. So, if you're a supporter of this whole nonsense, you're going to be able to say, we're not abolishing ICE. And that is technically true. You're not. But the courts don't care. They care about the effects that are being brought on by these supposed changes that the Democrats are trying to force through by not funding the government. The enforcement will become so procedurally complex that it will rarely happen. And it'll become so dangerous that agents hesitate to act, or so costly that agencies can't staff operations. Then the law is being nullified in practice, and the minority group, meaning the communists or socialists in the Democratic Party, get away with breaking the law because they should have repealed the law. But this way, in their mind, their hands are clean, right? You get what I'm saying? So that's called enforcement through futility. There's a term for it. And it's just as unconstitutional as repeal by fiat. So today it's immigration law. Tomorrow it could be any law a future Congress decides it doesn't like but can't repeal. Environmental law, gun law, tax law, labor law. If this tactic stands, then no statute is safe. This isn't a debate about compassion or politics. It's a debate about whether laws mean what they say or only what's politically convenient. And when you see this, you know that this has the marks of socialist adventurism on it. They are out there to use the Constitution and the laws of the country in such a manner that they become meaningless, as the term First Amendment now is. If I jump into a church that's in session and I decide to shoot 7 people and yell out free whoever, I am going to tell you that I was within my First Amendment rights to do this. And it's wrong. And it's always wrong. But the thing is, eventually people will be reading this saying, oh my God, that guy had his First Amendment rights violated killing those people in that church. What were they thinking? And the other guy will say, well, blah, blah, blah. I don't have a brain either. And it will continue along that way until these words mean nothing to anybody. And that is how socialism enjoys things, where a constitution isn't worth the paper it's written on. You talk to the old KGB guys, their thing was, we didn't have to bring you down the way we brought you down because you were going to do it yourself with a little help. We have libraries all over the country. Most people go to the library these days if they're younger, if they go at all. It used to be in poorer neighborhoods to rent DVDs or music, and then it was to use the internet, and very little of it is to use the books. The city of Philadelphia, where I'm from, had a wonderful collection of library books, a lot of really good and rare stuff in the Central Library building down there. Oh, geez, what street is that on? It's a little bit above Center City. You're going out of town. I would bet you there's probably the only people go in there when I was there were bums to go down in the first floor and take a shower in the sink and shit everywhere and do all that nonsense. Most people that were coming there were not using the books as books, as tools, as research, none of that. And that was what some of the KGB were proud that they were able to instill that in the Americans, because the old robber barons put them together and they said, oh, a robber baron gave that library to the community. He must want you to be slaves to him. The old robber barons used to put them in the community because they needed people that could read so they could go to work. The bullshit that they tell you about that German program or Austrian program, we do need trained workers. We need trained workers now more than we ever did. So maybe it wasn't so bad. What we have now is not that system. Okay. Just saying that to say that. So you understand where I'm coming from, where the words mean nothing. A public school education, right? They used to say, what was the oxymoron, military intelligence? How about a public school education? How about a well, you know what I'm saying. We're not going to get into that. So that's where we are. So you have this going on, and you should be saying, why aren't they doing this, that, and the other thing? And the Republicans, for the most part, are swamp creatures as well. There's so very few that are actually out there to help the Americans that it's very hard to get things done. And unfortunately, the Speaker of the House is not that man. And when we should be attacking things in the legal world, we don't have anybody over there either. And it's very disturbing to see that because obviously, with the money that's been funded through USAID and everybody else, you see the organizations they've been funding hasn't been putting young, impressionable men and women into a law school anywhere. So that's about it for this story. If you like this episode, you found it useful, share, like, and subscribe. We're not getting enough shares, likes, and subscribes. Actually, we do sometimes, but then they get whatever, not demonetized because we're nowhere near that. But YouTube still has a little bit of a hard on for us after all this time. So if you're watching us on Rumble or BitChute, thanks a lot. Rumble's doing the same thing. I don't think BitChute has any money, so nobody cares. And we're also on Substack, and we have our own site, www.southfloridaconservative.com. And otherwise, have a good Puxatawny Phil Groundhog Day to you all. And we will not be back in 5 minutes saying the same thing, only different. Goodbye.